Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Her Story in the Making, presented by Women of Fantasy Football and powered by Fantasy Alarm. I'm your host, Britt Flinn, and I'm super excited to have the host of the Get Real podcast and the FSWA award nominated winner, or just nominee, I guess.
Close enough.
Kacey Kasem. Kacey, how are you doing tonight?
I am so excellent. Thank you for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to it, so this is going to be fun.
Yes, I'm super excited. If you guys haven't listened to the Get Real podcast, Kacey is an absolutely amazing interviewer. So I'm going to try to put on my big girl panties and do the same, or at least half a good as job as Kacey does in this interview tonight. And we do have Troy in the chat. Troy, thank you so much for joining us and for the support. We really appreciate you. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I love having a fellow Cowboys fan on the show. How did you first become a fan of the Cowboys and get into football?
Well, I've been in the Dallas area my entire life, so still here. And growing up, my parents were huge Cowboys fans. My dad was an Eagles fan because he's from Pennsylvania. But my mom kind of converted him, and then here I am growing up, seeing them in their heyday, their prime as a child. So it wasn't as exciting as it would be now. And then, working our way to where we are now, I've seen all of it. So yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, been a Cowboys fan, football fan for just as long, but Cowboys own my heart.
Isn't it the worst team to own your heart too? Because like you said, we grew up in their heyday and their prime, and it's just kind of gone, and then maybe a little bump. Yeah. And then, since then, like it's such a tough franchise to root for, but we still love them. And your dad being an Eagles fan, I guess I didn't realize that. How did he feel when you pledged your allegiances to the Cowboys?
Well, see, the thing is too, like I didn't find this information out until I was like an adult. So I just assumed he was a Cowboys fan and he lived in Pennsylvania and got a lot of flack for it. And the funny thing is he lives there now again and he's still a Cowboys fan. And so he does get a lot of crap for it. So it's funny.
Yeah. I can only imagine. We've got a couple other people in the chat. We'll shout out here. We've got Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Yes, Chalupa Batman. Go Cowboys. We always love to see that. We have a former guest of ours, Gemma Martinez. Hi, Gemma. Great to see you. And then we've got, of course, Mr. Scampers, always showing their support. We appreciate having you guys in here. So let's just jump right into fantasy. Tell us a little bit how you first began playing fantasy and some of your experiences early on.
Yeah, for sure. So starting off, I was invited to a league by one of my friends, one of my guy friends. We used to have a group of us that would watch the Cowboys play on Sundays. And so I didn't really know what fantasy football was, but he's like, we need another person for our league. You know how that goes. Sorry,
all the time.
The last resort, And so I'm like, okay, cool. So I ended up playing in that league, and the story goes that I ended up winning, which is true. I ended up winning that league, but it was one of those leagues where like the last 2 weeks of the season combine to give you your total score. So because I relied on my kicker to win the whole thing. I don't even remember who he was, but thank you so much.
And this is why we stand kickers on this show.
Right on, though, for real. So since day one, I've been a fan there. But yeah, it was interesting to start playing just redraft and then not knowing exactly what I'm doing. And then the second year, I decided I was going to start an all women's league with all my friends that wanted to play. And we're just kind of like, I don't know, I've never played before. So I'm like, hello, let's go. And I'm competitive, so let's go. So that's basically the beginning times of fantasy for me.
Do you just do redraft still, or have you gotten sucked in to the dynasty world?
Yeah, I got sucked into the dynasty world. I actually thought I got sucked in late, but I guess there's still a lot of people that don't play dynasty. I play in 3 leagues right now. I was in more. I kind of had to learn how many I could actually handle. And 3 seems like a nice number, have the same commission every league. So it's all nice and smooth for me.
Yes, that's one thing about Dynasty. I don't think that you realize how much of a different strategy it is to go from, completely rebuilding a team from the ground up every single year to managing a team even in the off season. So I think you're right. I think 3 is a good number. I should take a lesson from you. Um, but
It took a while to get here.
yeah. But speaking of taking lessons, we've all learned a ton from you through your podcast and through your written content, even back before you started podcasting. So, how exactly did you first get into podcasting and creating content? And what was your process there?
So I started out by accident, kind of. I didn't ever want to put out content. I wasn't in it for putting out content. I was in it to absorb everybody else's content because I'm a big fan of just taking on in as much as I can. But when the opportunity happened, Ryan Hallam from Fighting Chance Fantasy asked me if I wanted to write, if because I've been on guesting on people's podcasts like the Open Bar, and my friend Tim Turner had me come on with him to try to test out his equipment, and then everybody was like, "You should really be doing something." So fast forward to when at the start of 2020 when COVID was real, whoa, and we were all at home bored. Then I was like, well, I'm doing this writing thing, and I was writing with the fantasy footballers as well at that time, and I was like, well, I'm doing this. The next logical step for me is to try and do a podcast. So I try to do a fantasy football podcast, and I'm just not good at that kind of stuff. I'm not good at explaining what goes on inside my head. And so I decided I needed to listen to other people's stories and kind of get the background on people in this space, because there's so many cool people in this space and we can learn a whole lot from them. So why not start a podcast where I can talk to people and see what makes them tick?
Was that the initial podcast or idea behind the Get Real podcast when you first created it? Was just getting into, what makes people tick, or was there a little bit more behind it, or what? Just how did it evolve from the ground up?
Yeah, for sure. It started off as just kind of a silly idea that I was talking to Russ Fisher about. He's one of my good friends, and I have my podcast hosted over with the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network. And so he's like my right hand guy. That's like giving me all the. I was like, but I need more tips, right? I need people to tell me, how do you balance life and this fantasy football stuff, putting out content and stuff. I don't know where to start when I was starting out. Where do you look for resources? So I wanted to kind of have, a guidebook for people so that they could look and listen and see that there's, this is what worked for this person, this is what worked for that person, and learning so much about people along the way. But like Matt Harmon back in the day had his Backyard Banter podcast where he talked to people in the industry that were his buds, and talking to them. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to talk to people. I fantasy advice, I'm not the best at, okay? I'm really not, and it's okay. But talking to people I really enjoy. And it was at a time where, we were at home and we didn't have anything to do, and I need to talk to people. I just do. I have to. And I'm that kind of person where, like, I say I don't like people, but talking to people is one of my favorite things to do. So why not do a podcast like that?
And I think it's so interesting the way that you approach this podcast. If again, I'll say it probably multiple times throughout the show, guys watching, if y'all haven't checked out that podcast, you really need to. And having been a participant on this show, especially when I was very new to podcasting, especially anything other than the format that we had set out, I was very nervous. I think I texted you and I was like, sorry, I'm just getting really bad anxiety. How's this going to go? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
But you make it so comfortable and easy for people of different backgrounds, for people who do different things. You're so good at talking to them. How has that kind of, I guess, other people's experiences transferred into your work? And what have you taken away to make yourself better in that space?
I've learned a lot, actually. It's crazy how much I've learned just doing this. And I know that not everybody's been able to listen to every single episode, but I have. So I've learned so much. And it's just one of the biggest things I learned is about time. Because when I first started, I felt like, and it's different for people who put out actual fantasy football content, because your stuff isn't evergreen, but my stuff is. So if I'm sick, I'm allowed to be sick. And I know that people that I've talked to on my show are like, I don't feel like I'm allowed to take a day off or do this or do that. And I have to just grind, which is fine. You can grind. But I've learned to kind of just like, if you don't just step back and breathe for a minute, you're going to burn out. It's not fun. So learn what works for you and kind of find that groove, because it's important to have your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think you and I have both been outspoken on our anxiety and trying to balance, careers that are outside and, our families and things like that. Um, what is some of your best advice, I guess, to somebody who is trying to balance, a full-time job, a family, and then do this on the side? Like, what are some things that you've learned?
I've learned that different things work at different times. It's not always going to be, this is how it's going to be. Sometimes you're going to get something thrown in that you're going to be like, oh no, and you're going to have to just figure it out, right? You're going to have to figure it out, but it's fun to figure these things out, right? So I've learned that you just kind of have to figure out how to balance it. And it is hard. Everybody's always like, it's so hard to figure out how to balance it. And as I sit here mumbling because I couldn't remember what question you were, see, this is what I do, behind the scenes stuff. But it's very important to just be able to set boundaries, to figure out what makes you feel good. You don't want to get to that point where you're just like that it feels like everything is a job. Like, not just your job, but everything is a job, right? You don't want to get to that point. So finding that healthy balance is always it's hard to do sometimes, but also it's fun getting there.
That's how I felt like cooking dinner for my husband as lately as a job. So, husband, if you're watching this, I'm really
See,
sorry for all the takeout lately, because
I'm a
it's
big fan of
important.
takeout. I'm a big fan of takeout. I do not like cooking. And when my wife is like, it's time to cook, I'm like, oh, isn't it kind of late? Shouldn't we order food instead?
It's takeout time. We've got Albert in the chat. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. We've also got Bob Harris. Thank you so much for tuning in, Bob. And guys, if y'all have a question for Kacey, feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll try to get to that as soon and as timely as we can. But I kind of want to switch gears and talk about you being nominated for an FSWA award. What did it feel like to be nominated for that award? What episode was it for? And how do you think that this is going to continue to help you grow?
Yeah, for sure. JJ Zacharyson is who the episode was. I wanted to get that out there right now because that guy is amazing, and the conversation I had with him was amazing. To actually be nominated, to be a finalist, it's just I was shaking, right? I was so excited. Like, I don't even know how to put it into words how I felt, but like, this podcast means so much to me. It's crazy how much this podcast means to me. I wouldn't think that this hobby that I've been a fan of for so long is just something that I've stuck with. So I was at a loss for words. It was so exciting. And I told my friends, my family, my therapist, my boss, my everybody, I was just like, listen, this is so exciting for me because I am so happy to be able to share other people's stories. And it's just like me, little old me, doing this podcast when it comes to putting it out and doing all that stuff. And it doesn't come out every week. And it might sound a little hiccupy here and there. It's just me. And I've got a lot going on. Like I said, you have a lot. We all have a lot going on. So I'm kind of out there and tell people, yep, I got a life. So I used to be so concerned about how everybody else was taking everything. Like, oh, I have to have it out. I have to do this. But getting that recognition was just, it was so, it was just mind blowing.
I think I can speak for us all and everybody in the chat and everybody on Twitter that we were all so super stoked for you when that happened. And I have this question I always want to ask people for what their particular favorite moment of their career is. It almost has to be the FSWA award, right? Or is there something out there that's a little different?
Well, okay, so that is probably the thing that, like, made me shake and crazy and all that stuff, like, that's the thing, that's probably, like, the ding, ding, ding moment, but also, when we were at the expo and we did the women's panel, I mean, obviously, that was crazy to see that many people in a room for us, and that was an experience that I never could have imagined being a part of, right? So, that was up there too, but, like, in a shaking in a different way, probably because I was nervous to be around all of y'all, but, it was that was a good time. That was very I don't know, and my dad was there, so he was all proud, and my wife was there, and she was all proud, so you kinda feel like a rock star even if you're not. It's fun.
You brought your whole contingency to the expo, and it was just the most pure thing. Wasn't he wearing a shirt that was
Yeah.
like Casey's dad or something
He
like
had a
that?
Rad
That
Dad shirt on that I got him, yeah. Yeah,
yes,
and
it
he was
was just
wearing
a
my
whole moment.
Kacey Kasem shirt the day before, so yeah, he was rocking
I love that so much. Dad's in the house. Let's go.
it.
We all love a supportive dad. But so with this job comes a little bit of anxiety. You're always especially when you're putting out content, just kind of sometimes at the mercy of the trolls. You're at the mercy of just people who aren't necessarily the happiest people. And that can really affect your mental health. And you've been pretty open about your anxiety, which somebody who hasn't necessarily always been, I really appreciate that because I've learned a lot from it and learned a lot how to deal with it from you putting that out there. But how have you navigated that in this space? And how has doing the Get Real pod kind of helped you overcome some of that?
My anxiety is kind of one of the reasons I started the podcast because I kind of wanted to force myself to do something out of my comfort zone, which is something I still hate doing. Don't get me wrong, but I kind of jumped into it just thinking, okay, let me try to this is going to be something that I'm going to enjoy doing. I just need to get over my fear of doing it. I started going to therapy, started talking about it's crazy to go pay somebody to talk about your podcast basically, but I'm sitting there talking about like stressing out and having the anxiety of like, am I going to do this? I'm going to do that. Can I get this done? This doesn't sound right. People aren't going to like this, worrying about other people and not worrying about why I was doing it in the first place. My anxiety, I don't know. It's I really do like being in front of people and talking and performing. I rap in front of people. I do all of that, and that's fine being around a big group like that. But like just things in general, my anxiety, like driving to the airport gives me anxiety. Standing in line at the airport gives me like, and that's like real legit anxiety. Like I'm gonna throw up, and so like but now that I've started to like talk more to people and kind of put it out there and hear that other people feel the same way that I do. That's kind of the moral of the podcast. It's kind of the whole thing is to learn that everybody has something that they're going through or something that is similar to what you have. You can hear a story and be like, that's just like me. So I thought being more vocal about having generalized anxiety disorder and talking more about it and doing that would be beneficial to people that also feel the same way because I wanted somebody that would say like, "Hey, this is what I'm doing despite the fact that I have anxiety."
Yeah, exactly. And I've said this again, I'll say it again. You definitely helped me just speaking because I was like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not just this weird, like, self-conscious person. Like everybody's dealing with this. But let's go back to the freestyle rapping because I think that is one of the coolest things ever. As somebody who stumbles over their words talking,
Yeah.
I want to know how you got into that and just kind of what you've done with it.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. It's like a party trick I like to say, except for like I can do it when I'm not partying. I don't want to brag or anything because it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it is when you see somebody like me sitting there, even if I was halfway decent, which I say I am, people are still gonna be like, well, it's this 39-year-old white chick up here. Like, so I'm like, yeah, 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 yo. But I started doing it like mi middle school, high school on the track bus. I remember we would sit back there and I started doing it that way. I started listening to Beastie Boys and trying to rap along to like Intergalactic and stuff. And I just started doing it and people were like, "Whoa." And I'm not exactly sure like how it grew to be what it was, but I've rapped on stage with Cobra Starship like 6 times. And at Warped Tour, I won tickets to see 311 because I rapped in a rap battle there. And then I did a 3-hour freestyle rap for Fantasy Cares and during the Scott Fish Bowl a few years back, and that was crazy and probably not the best, but it was still like 3 hours of me sitting there and like trying to come up with stuff off the top of my head. So I don't know how I do it. I'm not good at math or anything, but when it comes to like sentences and words and stuff, I don't know. I can figure it out.
And weren't you in the Notorious B.I.G. in the Scott Fish Bowl? Was it Scott Fish Bowl 11 that had all the
Yes,
bands?
yes. My Notorious B.I.G. right here. That's my dude. Yeah. So like I always say, Biggie is like everybody, not everybody, but a big portion of the rap that I like now. Like the people that are coming up now, even like that was like the dude that people aspire to be, you know, like the Matthew Berry of rap, the rap game, right? So there you go.
I just think that's so cool, and I don't think that I'm alone in that. We've got Casey Rocks in the chat, and then off the top of the dome, freestyle. I cannot even imagine doing freestyle as somebody who probably won't even have a spontaneous funeral. To be honest, I can't imagine freestyling. So mad props to you there. But is there? How did you get into cider as well? I know I love seeing your ciders and your sours, like because we don't get all of those companies up here because they are like microbrew distillery, things like that we can't get in Arkansas. So how did kind of that come about? And just what's your favorite? Just give me a little overview.
Okay. So yeah, cider's my go-to drink. After years and years and years of drinking, I finally figured out what works for me so that my hangovers aren't so bad. Works for me as long as I'm drinking water because those can be a little sweet. But ciders, they're just delicious. Like if you like apple juice, okay, cool. If you like less sweet, if you like dry, there you go. I get me a nice dry. But my favorite cider is Bishop Cider Company's Crackberry. It is cranberries, blackberries, deliciousness, and it tells you there's no crack in it, but it's still delicious, right? And I keep coming back for it, so who knows what's really in it. But yeah, cider, big cider kick. We've got Austin East Ciders in Texas, and we have Bishop Cidery and Trinity Cider Company. So there's a lot of really cool cideries around here. And with the sours, I'm a big, I wouldn't say big sour fan because I'm not. I don't really like beer at all, but there are some lactose sours that are just delicious. It like sets it off the right way that it doesn't taste like beer to me because I'm that type of person that if you tell me, oh, this doesn't taste like beer, I'm like, this tastes like beer. So don't lie to me. But I can do that. And I never thought that I'd like lactose in a beer. Like that just doesn't sound like me, right? But it is. So I'll chill with that. So yeah, good drinking.
I love that. Guys, we're getting up against it. If y'all have any questions for Kacey, throw them in the chat. We've got Dynasty Hot Sauce in here. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm just going to jump right in and say, what advice would you give to others trying to create a career in the fantasy sports world? Or what do you wish you knew when you started?
For both of those, listen to my podcast. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but do though. Go listen to it.
But no, I mean, what I wish I would have known before all of this is before jumping into it was scheduling people is a lot harder than you think. For starters, you've got to, because like with me, there's people that are like, I can't do any of the times. And I'm like, I really want you on my podcast though. So you have to figure that out. Just to not stress out about it that much. Like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You can always come back to it. You can always, so, and I wish that I would have had, you know, my advice also is to get yourself a somebody that you can look up to and somebody that you can go to for advice, somebody that can help you. Because there's plenty of people out there. Most of the people that have been on my podcast have said, if you have any kind of questions, concerns, if you want me to look at your stuff, just hit me up. So like, that's the coolest thing is to know that this community is so rad that people are willing to just help out. So find somebody that can kind of be your guiding point, like Russ is for me.
I love that. And Wendy has a question. Where can we listen to past podcasts and where at?
Yes. You can listen to it anywhere that you listen to your podcast, I'm pretty sure. So I listen to it on Spotify, but I know that most of y'all listen to it on Apple based on whatever they tell me on Spotify. But yeah, you can go find it. It's Get Real with Kacey Kasem. And then there's 81 episodes, I think, up right now. And there's a few more that are coming out soon. I'm just so bad right now. It's been crazy around here with my sister getting married and family coming into town and all that other stuff. So it'll be
And
out.
just life. But 81
Life.
episodes to me is absolutely insane. Like I'm biggest fan. I seriously.
It's been
um,
it's been interesting having talked to that many people, and I plan on doing so many more. So it's just yeah.
well, we can't wait. And I guess that leads us into our next question. You provided a good segue for this. Since this show is called Her Story in the Making, tell us how you see your story continuing and some goals that you're setting for yourself in the space over the next few years.
My goals. I want to get over 100 episodes, right? And I know I'm going to do more than that, but I want to get to 100 sooner than later because I know I keep putting things off and I can do it. We can do it, guys. So we're going to get there. And I would love to just get more people listening. So I know that people reach out to me and tell me that they listen to it, and it makes me so happy when people do that. And I follow people who are like super dope because they listen to my podcast and I had no idea they existed until they reached out to me. So reach out to me, and I just want more and more people to just be able to learn, to be able to create, put out more content. And I love breaking people, quote unquote, breaking people into the business or whatever. Say like, hey, I knew that person when they only had 200 followers and wrote on their own blog over here. And now they're crazy working for so and so and doing this, that, and the other. It's just crazy to see. So I just want to keep helping people build on to what they're doing and also spread everybody's stories.
That is the best. And before we go, I'm going to tell everybody on here again, go listen to Kacey's podcast. It's amazing. But Kacey, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us more about your work and where people can find you.
Yes. You can find all the podcast stuff at I can't remember the name of my podcast, Get Real with Kacey Kasem. So go search that and subscribe, do all that jazz. And then you can find me at the Kacey Kasem on Twitter and at GetReal_pod for the Twitter of the podcast.
All right. Thank you so much. You are absolutely amazing. Can't wait for another weekend in Canton with you where we have the big room this time, which is awesome. Guys, thank you so much for joining us in the chat and participating. Join us in 2 weeks for a very, very special guest that we are super excited to have. Same channel, same time, and we will see you then.